Okay, technical difficulties. All right. Apparently, I have to do this vertical because YouTube is messing with me. To start a whole new broadcast if I want to switch orientation, so do it this way. And yes. Yep, I'm doing it. It's very dark. Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion. I am dead, but it's not so bad. I've learned to live with it. I'm sorry I can't properly introduce myself, but I don't have a name anymore. Hardly any of us do. We lose them like car keys, forget them like anniversaries. Mine might have started with an R, but that's all I have now. It's funny because back when I was alive, I was always forgetting other people's names. My friend M says the irony of being a zombie is that everything is funny, but you can't smile because your lips have rotted off. None of us are particularly attractive, but death has been kinder to me than some. I'm still in the early stages of decay, just the gray skin, the unpleasant smell, the dark circles under my eyes. I could almost pass for a living man in need of a vacation. Before I became a zombie, I must have been a businessman, a banker, a broker, or some young temp learning the ropes, because I'm wearing fairly nice clothes. Black slacks, gray shirt, red tie. M makes fun of me sometimes. He points at my tie and tries to laugh, a choked, gurgling rumble deep in his gut. His clothes are holey jeans and a plain white t-shirt. The shirt is looking pretty macabre by now. He should have picked a darker color. We like to joke and speculate about our clothes, since these final fashion choices are the only indication of who we were before we became no one. Some are less obvious than mine. Shorts and a sweater, skirt and a blouse. So we make random guesses. You were a waitress. You were a student. Ring any bells? It never does. No one I know has any specific memories, just a vague, vestigial knowledge of a world long gone. faint impressions of past lives that linger like phantom limbs. We recognize civilization, buildings, cars, a general overview, but we have no personal role in it, no history. We're just here. We do what we do, time passes, and no one asks questions. But like I've said, it's not so bad. We may appear mindless, but we aren't. The rusty cogs of cogency still spin, just geared down and down till the outer motion is barely visible. We grunt and groan, we shrug and nod, and sometimes a few words slip out. It's not that different from before. But it does make me sad that we've forgotten our names. Out of everything, this seems to me the most tragic. I miss my own and I mourn for everyone else's, because I'd like to love them, but I don't know who they are. There are hundreds of us living in an abandoned airport outside some large city. We don't need shelter or warmth, obviously, but we like having the walls and roofs over our heads. Otherwise, we'd just be wandering in an open field of dust somewhere, and that would be horrifying, to have nothing at all around us, nothing to touch or look at, no hard lines whatsoever, just us and the gaping maw of the sky. I imagine that's what being full dead is like, an emptiness vast and absolute. I think we've been here a long time. I still have all my flesh, but there are elders who are little more than skeletons with clinging bits of muscle, dry as jerky. Somehow it still extends and contracts, and they keep moving. I've never seen any of us die of old age. Left alone with plenty of food, maybe we'd live forever. I don't know. The future is as blurry to me as the past. I can't seem to make myself care about anything to the right or left of the present, and the present isn't exactly urgent. You might say death has relaxed me. I'm riding the escalators when M finds me. I ride the escalators several times a day, whenever they move. It's become a ritual. The airport is derelict, but the power still flickers on sometimes, maybe flowing from emergency generators stuttering deep underground. Lights flash and screens blink, machines jolt into motion. I cherish these moments, the feeling of things coming to life. I stand on the steps and ascend like a soul into heaven, that sugary dream of our childhoods, now a tasteless joke. After maybe 30 repetitions, I rise to find M waiting for me at the top. He is hundreds of pounds of muscle and fat draped on a 6'5" frame. Bearded, bald, bruised, and rotten, his grisly visage slides into view as I crest the staircase summit. Is he the angel that greets me at the gates? His ragged mouth is oozing black drool. He points a finger in a vague direction and grunts, "City." I nod and follow him. We're going out to find food. A hunting party forms around us as we shuffle toward town. It's not hard to find recruits for these expeditions, even if no one is hungry. Focused thought is a rare occurrence here, and we all follow it when it manifests. Otherwise, we'd just be standing around and groaning all day. We do a lot of standing around and groaning. Years pass this way. The flesh withers on our bones, and we stand here waiting for it to go. I often wonder how old I am. The city where we do our hunting is conveniently close. We arrive around noon the next day and start looking for flesh. The new hunger is a strange feeling. We don't feel it in our stomachs. Some of us don't even have those. We feel it everywhere equally. A sinking, sagging sensation, as if our cells are deflating. Last winter, when so many living joined the dead and our prey became scarce, I watched some of my friends become full dead. The transition was undramatic. They just slowed down, then stopped, and after a while I realized they were corpses. It disquieted me at first, but it's against etiquette to notice when one of us dies. I distracted myself with some groaning. I think the world is mostly ended, because the cities we wander through are as rotten as we are. Buildings have collapsed, rusted cars clog the streets. Most glass is shattered, and the wind drifting through the hollow high-rises moans like an animal left to die. I don't know what happened. Disease, war, social collapse? Or was it just us, the dead replacing the living? I guess it's not so important. Once you arrived at the end of the world, it hardly matters which route you took. We start to smell the living as we approach a dilapidated apartment building. The smell is not the musk of sweat and skin, it's the effervescence of life energy, like the ionized tang of lightning and lavender. We don't smell it in our noses. It hits us deeper inside, near our brains, like wasabi. We converge on the building and crash our way inside. We find them huddled in a small studio unit with the windows boarded up. They are dressed worse than we are, wrapped in filthy tatters and rags, all of them badly in need of a shave. M will be saddled with a short blonde beard for the rest of his fleshy existence, but everyone else in our party is clean shaven. It's one of the perks of being dead, another thing we don't have to worry about anymore. Beards, hair, toenails, no more fighting biology. Our wild bodies have finally been tamed. Slow and clumsy, but with unswerving commitment, we launch ourselves at the living. Shotgun blasts fill the dusty air with gunpowder and gore. Black blood spatters the walls. The loss of an arm, a leg, a portion of torso, this is disregarded, shrugged off, a minor cosmetic issue. But some of us take shots to our brains, and we drop. Apparently there's still something of value in that withered gray sponge, because if we lose it, we're corpses. The zombies to my left and right hit the ground with moist thuds, but there are plenty of us. We are overwhelming. We set upon the living, and we eat. Eating is not a pleasant business. I chew off a man's arm, and I hate it. I hate his screams, because I don't like pain. I don't like hurting people. But this is the world now. This is what we do. Of course, if I don't eat all of him, if I spare his brain, he'll rise up and follow me back to the airport, and that might make me feel better. I'll introduce him to everyone, and maybe we'll stand around and groan for a while. It's hard to say what friends are anymore, but that might be close. If I restrain myself, if I leave enough. But I don't. I can't. As always, I go straight for the good part, the part that makes my head light up like a picture tube. I eat the brain, and for about 30 seconds, I have memories, flashes of parades, perfume, music, life. Then it fades, and I get up, and we all stumble out of the city, still cold and gray, but feeling a little better. Not good exactly, not happy, certainly not alive, but a little less dead. This is the best we can do. I trail behind the group as the city disappears behind us. My steps plod a little heavier than the others. When I pause at a rain-filled pothole to scrub gore off my face and clothes, M drops back and slaps a hand on my shoulder. He knows my distaste for some of our routines. He knows I'm a little more sensitive than most. Sometimes he teases me, twirls my messy black hair into pigtails, and says, "Girl, such girl." But he knows when to take my gloom seriously. He pats my shoulder and just looks at me. His face isn't capable of much expressive nuance anymore, but I know what he wants to say. I nod and we keep walking. I don't know why we have to kill people. I don't know what chewing through a man's neck accomplishes. I steal what he has to replace what I lack. He disappears, and I stay. It's simple but senseless. Arbitrary laws from some lunatic legislator in the sky. But following those laws keeps me walking, so I follow them to the letter. I eat until I stop eating, then I eat again. How did this start? How did we become what we are? Was it some mysterious virus, gamma rays, an ancient curse, or something even more absurd? No one talks about it much. We are here, and this is the way it is. We don't complain. We don't ask questions. We go about our business. There is a chasm between me and the world outside of me, a gap so wide my feelings can't cross it. By the time my screams reach the other side, they have dwindled into groans. At the arrivals gate, we are greeted by a small crowd watching us with hungry eyes or eye sockets. We drop our cargo on the floor, two mostly intact men, a few meaty legs, and a dismembered torso, all still warm. Call it leftovers, call it takeout. Our fellow dead fall on them and feast right there on the floor like animals. The life remaining in those cells will keep them from full dying, but the dead who don't hunt will never quite be satisfied. Like men at sea deprived of fresh fruit, they will wither in their deficiencies, weak and perpetually empty, because the new hunger is a lonely monster. It grudgingly accepts the brown meat and lukewarm blood, but what it craves is closeness, that grim sense of connection that courses between their eyes and ours in those final moments, like some dark negative of love. I wave to M and then break free from the crowd. I have long since acclimated to the dead's pervasive stench, but the reek rising off them today feels especially fetid. Breathing is optional, but I need some air. I wander out into the connecting hallways and ride the conveyors. I stand on the belt, and watch the scenery scroll by through the window wall. Not much to see. The runways are turning green, overrun with grass and brush. Jets lie motionless on the concrete like beached whales, white and monumental. Moby Dick conquered at last. Before, when I was alive, I could never have done this. Standing still, watching the world pass by me, thinking about nearly nothing. I remember effort. I remember targets and deadlines, goals and ambitions. I remember being purposeful, always, everywhere, all the time. Now I'm just standing here on the conveyor, along for the ride. I reach the end, turn around, and go back the other way. The world has been distilled. Being dead is easy. After a few hours of this, I notice a female on the opposite conveyor. She doesn't lurch or groan like most of us. Her head just lolls from side to side. I like that about her, that she doesn't lurch or groan. I catch her eye and stare at her as we approach. For a brief moment, we are side by side, only a few feet away. We pass, then travel on to opposite ends of the hall. We turn around and look at each other. We get back on the conveyors. We pass each other again. I grimace, and she grimaces back. On our third pass, the airport power dies, and we come to a halt perfectly aligned. I wheeze hello, and she responds with a hunch of her shoulder. I like her. I reach out and touch her hair. Like me, her decomposition is at an early stage. Her skin is pale and her eyes are sunken, but she has no exposed bones or organs. Her irises are an especially light shade of that strange pewter gray that all the dead share. Her grave clothes are a black skirt and a snug white button-up. I suspect she used to be a receptionist. Pinned to her chest is a silver name tag. She has a name. I stare hard at the tag. I lean in close, putting my face inches from her breasts, but it doesn't help. The letters spin and reverse in my vision. I can't hold them down. As always, they elude me, just a series of meaningless lines and blots. Another of M's undead ironies. From name tags to newspapers, the answers to our questions are written all around us, and we don't know how to read. I point at the tag and look her in the eyes. Your name? She looks at me blankly. I point at myself and pronounce the remaining fragment of my own name. Then I point at her again. Her eyes drop to the floor. She shakes her head. She doesn't remember. She doesn't even have syllable one like Em and I do. She is no one. But don't I always expect too much? I reach out and take her hand. We walk off the conveyors with our arms stretched across the divider. This female and I have fallen in love, or what's left of it. I think I remember what love was like before. There were complex emotional and biological factors. We had elaborate tests to pass, connections to forge, ups and downs, and tears and whirlwinds. It was an ordeal, an exercise in agony, but it was alive. The new love is simpler, easier, but small. My girlfriend doesn't talk much. We walk through the echoing corridors of the airport, occasionally passing someone staring out a window or at a wall. I try to think of things to say, but nothing comes, and if something did come, I probably couldn't say it. This is my great obstacle, the biggest of all the boulders littering my path. In my mind, I am eloquent. I can climb intricate scaffolds of words to reach the highest cathedral ceilings and paint my thoughts, but when I open my mouth, it all collapses. So far, my personal record is 4 rolling syllables before something jams. And I may be the most loquacious zombie in this airport. I don't know why we can't speak. I can't explain the suffocating silence that hangs over our world, cutting us off from each other like prison visit plexiglass. Prepositions are painful, articles are arduous, adjectives are wild overachievements. Is this muteness a real physical handicap? One of the many symptoms of being dead? Or do we just have nothing left to say? I attempt conversation with my girlfriend, testing out a few awkward phrases and shallow questions, trying to get a reaction out of her, any twitch of wit, but she just looks at me like I'm weird. We wander for a few hours, directionless, then she grips my hand and starts leading me somewhere. We stumble our way down the halted escalators and out onto the tarmac, and I sigh wearily. She is taking me to church. The dead have built a sanctuary on the runway. At some point in the distant past, someone pushed all the stair trucks together into a circle, forming a kind of amphitheater. We gather here, we stand here, we lift our arms and moan. The ancient bonies wave their skeletal limbs in the center circle, rasping out dry, wordless sermons through toothy grins. I don't understand what this is. I don't think any of us do. But it's the only time we willingly gather under the open sky, that vast cosmic mouth, distant mountains like teeth in the skull of God, yawning wide to devour us, to swallow us down to where we probably belong. My girlfriend appears to be more devout than I am. She closes her eyes and waves her arms in a way that looks almost heartfelt. I stand next to her and hold my hands in the air stiffly. At some unknown cue, maybe drawn by her fervor, the bonies stop their preaching and stare at us. One of them comes forward, climbs our stairs, and takes us both by the wrists. It leads us down into the circle and raises our hands in its clawed grip. It lets out a kind of roar, an unearthly sound like a blast of air through a broken hunting horn, shockingly loud, frightening birds out of trees. The congregation murmurs in response, and it's done. We're married. We step back onto the stair seats. The service resumes. My new wife closes her eyes and waves her arms. The day after our wedding, we have children. A small group of bonies stops us in the hall and presents them to us, a boy and a girl, both around 6 years old. The boy is curly blonde with gray skin and gray eyes, perhaps once Caucasian. The girl is darker, with black hair and ashy brown skin, deeply shadowed around her steely eyes. She may have been Arab. The bonies nudge them forward and they give us tentative smiles, hug our legs. I pat them on their heads and ask their names, but they don't have any. I sigh, and my wife and I keep walking, hand in hand with our new children. I wasn't exactly expecting this. This is a big responsibility. The young dead don't have the natural feeding instincts the adults do. They have to be tended and trained, and they will never grow up. Stunted by our curse, they will stay small and rot, then become little skeletons, animate but empty, their brains rattling stiff in their skulls, repeating their routines and rituals until one day, I can only assume, the bones themselves will disintegrate and they'll just be gone. Look at them. Watch them as my wife and I release their hands and they wander outside to play. They tease each other and grin. They play with things that aren't even toys, staplers and mugs and calculators. They giggle and laugh, though it sounds choked through their dry throats. We've bleached their brains, robbed them of breath, but they still cling to the cliff edge. They resist our curse for as long as they possibly can. I watch them disappear into the pale daylight at the end of the hall. Deep inside me, in some dark and cobweb chamber, I feel something twitch. So, end of chapter 1. Are we still going? Still live? Somebody give me a sign because I couldn't look up during that. I don't know if my connection's still gone. Okay, great. I was expecting to look up and find a disconnected feed, and I would have been talking to myself this whole time. So, yeah, that's a little rough start. I was over at my neighbor's house meeting them for the first time, and got back a little late, had to scramble to get this started. For some reason, it locked me into portrait mode, so this probably looks terrible on desktop, but if you're watching on your phone, it's probably better. Next time it'll be smoother. But, so yeah, after I do each chapter, I wanted to hang out for a couple minutes and do a quick Q&A, see if I can answer any burning questions that maybe are not, maybe things I don't want to reveal in a public forum within reason. So any questions about let's that doesn't have to be limited, whatever. But, something related to the first chapter maybe. If not, we can just chat. Although I already did a chat earlier today. How much time passed? Like until when? Oh, okay. I think that was the same day. As far as I'm reading it, doesn't really have an answer necessarily, but very shortly after. I don't think she didn't plan the wedding. No, the church is a regular occurrence every Sunday. She's just devout, like it says. So she dragged him there. The Bonies decide whatever they decide by some unknown internal logic. So they saw somebody who looked like a couple, and they followed their instincts, which is marriage. Anything else? That section in particular, this was pretty surreal to reread this because I've almost forgotten this book. I'm still very heavily versed in all the other books, but this one, it's been so long since I've actually read any significant portion of it that I kind of felt like it was the first time for me, and I'm like, what happens next? So the whole thing with him and his girlfriend, that was basically the short story that it started this whole thing. In that short, that was the whole story, was him meeting her and deciding that the new love is easy and nothing matters and they don't have to try, and so they just enjoy it. And ironically, the novel ended up basically inverting the whole premise of that story, and it begins in the same place, but then it's like, no, we need more than this. Just a comment there. Yeah, definitely semi-autobiographical. Um, I've certainly been on plenty of dates where I'm talking to a wall, and I know we can all relate to that experience. Um, there are often times where, not even dates necessarily, but just social interactions in general, where I want to make it interesting. I want to talk about things that are interesting to me and get some kind of mutual back and forth going. And the person I'm talking to is just has no opinions of their own, and they don't have anything to offer, and they just kind of nod and react, but they never contribute. So I find myself like I'm trying to get them involved, but I end up just talking continuously because they won't jump in, they won't participate, and so I have to really go out of my way to draw them in, which is funny because I'm not really generally the most talkative person in the room. I'm usually the one who hangs back and listens, and that is kind of my first instinct. But oftentimes, if someone else is not going to create the conversation, I have to do it myself. Wow, we got an old timer in here. Someone who was there from the first story. His name, it does have special significance, not to me personally, but to his character in the story. Um, and yeah, that's about all I can say about it. It's a multi-layered reference. There's a mythological element to it, and which is sort of seeded throughout the books. There are a lot of characters have uh, certain certain references to a certain mythology that keeps recurring for a reason that is also thematic, but it's partly that and it's partly another thing, which is more of a syntactical reference. And that's all I can say about his name. Kids are not based on anybody. Well, they are a little bit actually. I seem to recall thinking of a couple kids that I used to supervise for my old job. While I was writing this book, I was a visitation supervisor for foster kids. So I would pick up kids from their foster homes and bring them to their visits and you know, supervise the visit with their biological parents. And so there's a lot of different kids coming in and out of my life. And they were loosely based on a couple kids that I was supervising. I think I had them in mind, but at the time, the kids don't really have a personality in Warm Bodies. They reveal a personality in the later books when they actually start talking and doing stuff. But in Warm Bodies, they're kind of just the concept of kids, which, as you can see at the end of that chapter, is sort of somewhat of a catalyst, something that triggers something in the earlier sparks in ours awakening. A specific sound that the bonies sound like. No, I mean, I described it as best I could as was something a blast of air through a broken horn. I sort of imagine it being, I don't know, maybe almost reminiscent of the T-Rex roar in Jurassic Park, but kind of smaller and less powerful. This sort of sustained atonal howl, but not sounding like it's coming from a mouth because they don't have mouths. So basically, it would be something metaphysical because they can't vocalize. They have no vocal tracts. They're bones. So any noises they make are basically magical in nature. The hums and the various creepy noises that are described coming from them are obviously not actual vocalizations. So yeah, it's something, imagine like an undead T-Rex who was howling through its broken soul. Something like that. By the way, every time I lean forward weirdly like this, it's because I'm scrolling back to look at the comments. M was based loosely on a friend of mine. He is a patron actually, but I don't think he's in these chats. But my friend Dale was kind of an inspiration. He was he's Dale's better looking than M is described as, but he's very large man and has kind of a similar. When I was, I don't know, younger, he was a roommate for a while, and he would kind of tease me all the time and knock me around and yeah, he's just kind of a chop buster and but like in this sort of loving big brother sort of way, which is sort of how I imagined M is like R as the kind of sensitive, delicate guy, and M is doesn't give a shit, just tough macho man, and he teases R relentlessly, but it's all from a place of affection. Undead T-Rex, good name. Welcome to use it free of charge. By the way, my outfit is not canonical. This is not quite what I imagine R wearing, but this is the best I could grab out of my closet on short notice. His tie is definitely not stripy. It would be solid red. And I don't imagine him wearing a short sleeve either, although I imagine them being torn to be somewhere, somewhere up here. But he's definitely not doing this pop punk look that I've got going on. So, all right, you have 10 seconds for any more questions, and then I'm shutting it down. Yeah, is that supposed to be his tie? I never really thought of it that way. That could be it. I assume you're referring to this burst. I never really thought of that as being his tie. I didn't design this, but but I I don't know. I mean, it's if it's his tie, it's highly stylized. I always just thought of it as being kind of like his thoughts or like, his energy, his passion sort of exploding out of him in some way. I really like this cover. I was very pleasantly surprised that they came up with something so kind of symbolic and abstract after many attempts that were just uninspiring covers, and then this popped out, and I was like, yeah, that like sounds like that looks like you actually read the book. So yeah, I guess it might be meant to be his tie, but it's sort of stylized into more of an abstract expression of his thoughts, his essence. The tie is, in the first book, it's somewhat of a important element. I think there's a scene. I think it's the first book where they mention, yeah, Julie says something about it being like representative of pushing back against the utility aesthetic of the time. She doesn't want him to change it, but it obviously becomes a much bigger deal in the later books when it actually is factored into the plot in a pretty significant way, which is funny because when the first book came out, that was some of the details that I hadn't fully planned out. I had the idea that R worked for some kind of evil corporation, but didn't have some of the specific details of what his role was in that, and so the tie was ignored in the movie, obviously, because it didn't seem like it was that important. And then later on, I made it really important. So now it's like a big deal. The difference in the character is much more prominent that way. But anyway, anybody else? 10 seconds. Cool. Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in, you guys. I'm pleasantly surprised to see 10 of you in the room. That's actually more than there were for the casual chat that I did earlier. So it was fun the first time ever performing a reading in the comfort and privacy of home. Feel like there's not that pressure to watch the clock and keep it moving quickly. I'm looking forward to digging into the rest of the story, and I hope you guys stick around, and hopefully more people join in too. All right, see you next week, roughly the same time. It'll be Sunday, and probably try to do a little bit earlier, but I'll let you know. Good night.